This is the presentation on European Code Law versus U.S. Common Law by Kirsten, Stephanie, Matthew, and Curtis. Legal systems fall into one of four categories: common law, civil law, religious law, and customary law. There are fundamental differences between each of these systems, and understanding them can prove important for business, as companies must comply with the laws in each region in which they operate. The vast majority of the world operates under civil and common law systems. In common law, legal precedent set in court rulings determines what is legal, while civil law relies solely on legislative decisions. Most countries predominantly use one system, but they often have a mix of features from each.
So let's talk about common law. So a little bit of history about common law. It was introduced by the English monarchs as a way for them to have the rulings and the decisions that they were making continue into the future and not just be applicable to one specific situation. That gave them the ability to enforce their power in future generations. It then became prevalent in former British colonies, and it actually came over to America as well. Common law is uncodified. What that means is there's no central location where all of the statutes and laws live. They're split between statutes, legislation, and also judicial precedents. So what is precedence? It's really important in common law. Basically, what that means is judges can make a ruling and a precedent is set that can be applied to future legal situations. In common law, judges really shape the law. Because they're able to make rulings and create precedents, it gives them the ability to not only make a ruling on a specific case, but have the application of that case continue on in future cases in the future. It also provides judges a lot more flexibility. With civil law, it's really just an execution of the law. But with common law, they're able to look at past precedents and really kind of make decisions on how the legislation and all of the precedents combine to make a decision for a present case. Civil law is a bit different. Civil law is very prevalent in continental Europe, Central and Southeast Asia, Central and South America, and East Asia. Civil law is codified. What that means is all of the codes, all of the laws are in one central location. Civil law can only be updated through legislation. Precedence doesn't exist here. Judges really only execute the laws as written, where in common law, they can look into precedents and make decisions based off that. Here, the judges really just look at how the law is written and execute rulings exactly how the law says that they should. The court systems address specific groups of code to make these decisions. So different codes have different applicable sentencing, different applicable courses of action, and the judges have to exactly execute the corresponding sentence as written. So some major differences. First is the legal system. So in civil law, core principles are codified into a referable system. In common law, they're characterized by case law developed through decisions of court. Another major difference is judges' roles. In civil law, the judge is the chief investigator. They establish the facts of the case and apply the provisions of the applicable code and nothing outside of that. In common law, however, judges are able to make rulings, set precedents, referee between lawyers. Judges really decide the matter of the law. And when a jury is absent, they can also find facts. In civil law, the Constitution is always used, where in common law, precedents can also be used to determine execution of law. In civil law, precedents is only used to determine administration of constitutional court matters, where in common law, it's used to rule on future or present cases and plays a much bigger role. Lastly, sources of law. So in civil law, it's constitution, legislation, custom, and then international law. In common law, there's constitution, legislation, but also judicial precedents, convention, and then also custom and international law.
Legal systems affect how a company conducts business. Understanding what legal system is utilized by each country your company operates in ensures the company meets compliance and taxation requirements, as well as other applicable regulations. As we've learned in this class, establishing global operations is demanding under the best of circumstances, but different legal realities make it even more challenging. Knowledge of the fundamental differences between legal systems is essential if a company is going to make sound business decisions. Overall, common law is less prescriptive than civil law and provides businesses with greater flexibility in terms of their operations. For example, common law allows reorganization when businesses get into financial trouble, while civil law focuses on liquidation. Common law also allows greater flexibility in terms of security over assets, allowing the use of security interests without formal transfer, while civil law requires security interests to be re-registered in the name of the new lender. Jurisdiction in international legal disputes is another major concern for companies operating globally. No judicial body exists to deal with disputes between two companies or organizations operating in different countries. In common law, jurisdiction is determined based on clauses included in the contract, meaning when you enter into a contract with common law countries, you can define in that contract where any legal dispute would be adjudicated. In civil law, it often depends on where the contract was entered into and where provisions of the contract were performed, providing companies with less control over the laws by which that contract will be governed. Often, companies will need to understand how their operations will be governed to determine the appropriate course of action in a business relationship. From our research, contractual relationships are one of the most important areas when it comes to understanding the type of legal system utilized for each party. This is because contracts represent a significant source of value for companies, but also present a large liability. Common law provides extensive freedom of contract, as few provisions are implied by law into the contractual relationship. Parties can set all of the terms necessary to govern the relationship between them into the contract during the course of their negotiations. In fact, this is essential to effective enforcement of the contract under common law, as almost everything not expressly prohibited by law is permitted in terms of a contractual relationship. That means as long as you're not breaking a law you're aware of, you can define how that act or provision should be governed with the words in your contract. Civil law includes several provisions that are implied into the contractual relationship. The contract can spell out how related law should be applied, but cannot change what is considered codified law in that country. For example, contracting authorities in civil law countries have the right to unilaterally modify contract terms or cancel a contract, and civil law does not allow the removal of these provisions. Additionally, in civil law, contracts must specify that parties agree to arbitration, and administrative courts will enforce the contract as written if mediation or arbitration is not an already agreed to provision.
So there could be consequences to not knowing the differences between each legal system. One of those could be that you could potentially sign a contract that is not protecting the best interests of the firm. It could also result in loss of profit or loss of physical and intellectual property. It could also result in legal action, which will result in huge fines or other monetary costs. Some of the potential benefits would be having the knowledge of these differences to use it to your advantage. This could be through contracts, negotiations, litigation fees, and things like bankruptcy. For example, bankruptcy in common law usually results in reorganization, but bankruptcy in civil law almost mandates liquidation. Knowing the difference between common law and civil law will help you decide whether you should expand internationally or not. Also, you could use either of these systems to your company's advantage to take advantage of things like contracts, negotiations, and bankruptcy, etc.